very excited about this podcast as we're going to kind of delve into the world of sports psychology and kind of a ringing endorsement before we get started, something that I got more familiar with during my playing days in Europe. And I found it to be, kind of the final frontier for me to kind of learn to harness my skills and improve as an athlete. So we're really excited to have the team from Inspire Wellness join us today. So Paul, Kate, and Marissa, thank you guys so much for joining us and sharing this information with our CUNY student athletes. I'm going to give you each kind of a chance to kind of discuss a little bit about your background, a little bit about what you do within Inspire Wellness, and kind of if you guys can all address how you got into this field. I think that's a great place to start, and then we'll just kind of turn it over to your presentations. And then, as always, for those of you who are on the webinar, feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'm assuming we will have a lot of questions and we will get to them after the PowerPoint. So Paul, let's start with you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having us. Really a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to starting this conversation and all the questions that might come through and just to expose people to sports psychology. I'll start with my introduction, then I'll pass it over to Kate. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and sports psychologist. Started really in my playing days with playing soccer in college. Really enjoyed the experience, had times where I felt burnt out, had times where I felt motivated, had experiences that were really high and others that just felt like a real struggle. So I was always interested in what created that. And once I went to grad school for psychology, better understanding the mind and how it impacted performance really taught me a lot about like looking back at those playing days and thinking through like, wow, okay, that's probably what I was experiencing there. That's what I was experiencing there. And taking that forward, right? There's a lot I learn about myself still as a performer. So just always been interested in the mind and how we take the mind and utilize it well for performance. So that's what brought me to the field, and that's what keeps me eager to learn more about myself and more about the science of sports psychology.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm Kate Martino. I'm a licensed associate counselor, sport and mental health counselor. And part of my role at Inspire is to work with people across the lifespan, from kids to adults, but I particularly specialize in working with athletes. I grew up playing 3 sports: basketball, soccer, and lacrosse. And I went on to play lacrosse in college at the University of North Carolina. My freshman year there, we actually won a national championship, Division I NCAA national championship. And for me, that was a very eye-opening experience to just be a part of a very competitive environment, both academic-wise and athletically. And so my career playing Division I lacrosse transitioned to a smaller school in Massachusetts, Holy Cross. But throughout the course of that, I really learned the importance of the mental side of the game, and just the emphasis on learning how to mentally perform your best so that you can then physically perform your best too.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marisa Norman. I am a sports psychologist at Inspire Wellness. A majority of my work is with athletes, whether that's athletes who need some support with mental health or they're coming in because they want to get better at their craft. In college, I walked on as a sprinter and high jumper at the University of Rhode Island, Division I, and I decided I wanted to be a heptathlete, pentathlete. And I think I give a lot of credit to my mental game to be able to do so. I will say my teammates were by far more naturally talented than me, but I was really determined to work on my mental game in addition to my physical performance, and as a result earned a scholarship, won conference in the heptathlon and the pentathlon. So I feel very passionate about the mental side of all sports and how much it can take you to the next level, and I'm excited that we're here today to be able to talk more about sports psychology with all of you.
Great, thank you. Marissa, that's definitely a story I can relate to. I always felt like as a professional athlete, there was people that were more talented than me. And so I needed to figure out ways to, in full candor, to keep earning money, right? At that level. So I think that's it's very relatable, your story. So thank you guys for all sharing.
Oh, our pleasure. So we'll shift now into, we have some slides prepared, and the first one being the who we are. And we went over that already. I think the only thing I'll add to what we talked about is the different levels that we work in. So we have the pleasure of working for the Brooklyn Nets and New York Liberty in some capacity, as well as a few other sports professional teams around this area, as well as NCAA athletes, high school athletes, and younger. And then beyond that is in performance, I kind of mentioned in my intro, we believe performance is more than just the field and more than the court and more than, sport, because you're performing as well within your schoolwork, your jobs, and your relationships. So these are concepts that we talk about today, and we're going to talk about them somewhat broadly so that they can be applied to all areas of life. So starting out with the title page here, we thought hard about, like, what will we talk about? There's so much we can dive into in terms of sports psychology. Do we want to go really heavy towards, the strategies and skills that we teach? Do we want to talk about the specifically about mental health and dealing with COVID? And we decided we'd be remiss from not talking about COVID, right? Because that's where we're at right now. A lot of us are dealing with like having to make adjustments with life, with school, with sport. And so we want to name one of the barriers that we're all figuring out how to overcome right now, and that's COVID. We thought this picture really helpful in the sense of this person swimming, they're moving. Some of you today might feel like you're treading water and you're being still, and that's okay. If you're coming to this talk feeling like you're just treading water, you're staying afloat, great. Maybe you'll take some ideas on how to begin swimming, how to begin moving. For those of you who are moving, maybe you'll take ideas on how to move quicker, to like figure out your direction and how to apply some of these strategies and ideas to your life in a way that benefits you and gets you moving in the right direction. So wanted to just note that, yes, sports psychology is applicable to our life in general, and we're going to talk about it now with the challenge of taking it beyond now. Don't just stop here in terms of this journey within sports psychology. And I want to give an overview, essentially, right? And as we kind of thought through, we decided we're going to give a broad brush. We're going to give you a sense in a number of areas of how we think about things, how we approach things. The first being an education on sports psychology. We're going to talk about what it is and how to understand it, how to conceptualize it. The services we provide. There might be some of you interested in whether it's utilizing sports psychology or if it's becoming a sports psychologist yourself. We want you to get a sense of what we do and how we do it so that you know some of the skills and some of the tools that we're utilizing. And that feeds into the next point in terms of the skills. We're going to talk about some skills and ideas, some that you can use now, some that apply to life and sport. And we want you to get a better sense of what's out there. And you might be surprised. There might be certain skills we talk about that you're utilizing in some capacity. And maybe there's some ideas on how to push you further. Lastly, we definitely also think we'd be remiss not to touch on the mental health considerations, right? That is an important area of our work because your mind you take everywhere. And what you're experiencing off the court or off the field or away from sport is going to impact sport and vice versa. So if we're looking at your mental health and how you're taking care of yourself, it's going to benefit you as a performer and as a person. So we wanted to start with this question, and we know, you're not able to necessarily talk and bring your thoughts, but we thought using the chat might be an interesting part of this process. So we wanted to throw out the question of what is sports psychology? So think about it and just throw it out there. Feel free to be wrong. Feel free to just send incomplete thoughts. What do you think sports psychology is? All right, mental state while in competition. how you mentally approach the game. Using your mindset as a tool. So a lot about the mind. I like that. What other thoughts are out there? The ability to work through challenges on and off the court, the field. Absolutely applies to both. How to overcome an obstacle you may face throughout your sports career. Definitely. Using strategy. Yep. So within these already, right? A lot of truth to, part of it's about the mindset. Part of it's about strategy, and those things interact. Ryan even pointing out that the mindset is a tool. It can be used for obstacles like Carrie talked about. Understanding how the mind can be able to coexist with the game itself. That's right. Any other thoughts? And I'll challenge any of you sitting there with a thought and not wanting to put it in because it might be wrong. Now's the time. Put it in there. Be wrong. Understanding how the mind can be able to coexist with the game. Yeah, we saw that one. Great. All right. Well, listen, some good thoughts already. And all of the things that were touched on, they are true. And so it's an interesting thing, right? Because our mind and thus our psychology there's depth and breadth, right? And it's involved in everything. And we thought we'd walk you through a model that we find helpful for a really broad view of what sports psychology is and really anchored in what a sports psychology does, like where a sports psychologist works. And so let's start in the center, right? The center box here talks about our typical functioning, including adversity of life, stressors, relationships, challenges, right? This is how, this is a place where you might think, okay, I'm doing good, right? So a sports psychologist can absolutely work in this realm in terms of kind of keeping you there, like making sure you're continuing. Like some people work with us because like, hey, I want to maintain where I'm at and feel good about it. And like, I know where I'm going to fall back or slip up. So let's work on that and make sure I'm staying solid. Now let's go to the left, to the less optimal functioning, right? This is where mental health can really kind of weigh in terms of depression and anxiety, maybe adjusting to a new role or a new aspect of your sport that's uncomfortable. And so that can lead to performance deterioration, right? It can leave you feeling less than your typical self, making you doubt, like increase in self-doubt, increase in discomfort in things that used to be comfortable, can put some roadblocks between you and growth. And so a sports psychologist can work in that area, trying to restore you back to typical, trying to, working on skills and strategies that help overcome the barriers you're experiencing and help you better understand what your mind is doing in both helpful and unhelpful ways, and moving you better back to you feeling yourself and feeling like back to okay, back to good. Now, if we go to the right of the typical, then we're in the realm of optimal. And this is a real fun place to work, where we're taking people who feel good, who feel okay, to moving them towards feeling great and performing great. We're trying to bring them to their optimal self and add skills that push them beyond what they believe they were capable of. Help them overcome the barriers of every day and overcome them in a way that's greater than they used to, right? So really dealing with improving their confidence, increasing motivation, right? They're motivated already, but how do we increase it and their skills for that? How do we add to their growth mindset? And maybe there's aspects of your life that you have a growth mindset. You embrace challenges. You're not when you hit roadblocks, it doesn't seem like a problem because I can overcome that. But so knowing that growth mindset's there, how do we expand that and continue to increase that? So an area of life where you feel less competent and you feel like you're not as effective as other areas, how do we bring those ideas and apply them to sport or specific aspects of sport. So a sports psychologist can work in all of these areas. Really, the goal here being continue to push towards that optimal functioning. We also thought it was important to dispel some of the myths. And some of this is within what I touched on already, but we thought it's important to talk about some tendencies or typical thoughts or things that people say to us when they come in. And the first being, going to a sports psychologist means there is something wrong with me. And the truth of the matter is, the most people who come for sports psychology are doing great, are doing good, and they just want to do even better. They want to see what their limits are. How can they push themselves further? Even within sport, part of that performance and pressure, the fact that you're dealing with that, there's a natural, you need to remind yourself there's some natural aspects to feeling uncomfortable. We need to embrace some of that. So when someone walks through our door, there may be nothing wrong with them, and usually there is nothing wrong. And even within those of you who would say, yeah, I'm kind of towards that side where I'm less than optimal, there are strategies that we can put in place to help you move quick. The next one in each session is focused on performance. Now, there is some truth to that, right? Because ultimately, if we're focused on optimizing you and increasing your abilities, especially within the mental game, it's about performance. At the same time, there's athletes that I work with. I know there's athletes that Marisa and Kate work with that a large part of what we talk about is actually away from the sport. We're trying to understand them within the context of their family, within their current relationships, and with other areas of life that can be a distraction. Because by better understanding that and other areas of life, it improves their performance because they have more focus and attention towards the sport. It's also finding things within their life and their tendencies of what they do helps us to better understand their reaction to their coach or to their teammates or to their doubt that they have within sport. Because, right, and I've said it before, their mind, we take it everywhere. And the things that we get tripped up on away from sport also tend to trip us up on the sport and performance realm. Making changes to improve my mental game will hurt performance. And that's one we typically hear. And there is some discomfort sometimes to some of the strategies we put people through and have them utilize, in the sense that it's different and change can be uncomfortable. At the same time, in terms of their performance, what we have over and over in terms of the science is when people do the work, their performance, they gain in performance abilities. They improve performance. And despite the discomfort that they might experience because they're trying something new and something they believe the belief could be that they're not good at it, by putting these in place and helping people continue to move and continue to grow, the performance continues to improve, and sometimes beyond what they thought they're capable of. Lastly, a sports psychologist does not address mental health issues. And that's another myth, right? So sports psychologist has all the training to deal with both mental health and sport and performance. So we do work within the mental health issues. And to add to that, the same strategies that tend to work within sport and performance have a great impact and are often used within the clinical realm as well, right? So part of that great example might be our thinking. We spend a lot of time within the clinical realm working on how people think, the distortions they use, the tendencies they fall into that are not helpful in order to get them moving and away from some of the symptoms they're experiencing or their mind is creating for them. And the same within sport. By better understanding your thinking and your tendencies and the patterns, both the ones that are really helpful as well as the ones that are maladaptive, can really help a person perform better.
All right, so as Paul mentioned, we like to think about sports psych on a continuum. So we're going to dive into each element of the continuum a little bit more. So let's start with this thriving and resilience end. So as Paul had mentioned, athletes aren't coming in at this point of the continuum because something is wrong. they could be performing quite well, but they want to take their game to the next level. So this could be, you know, athletes who maybe they haven't had a PR in about a year. And even though their PR is really great and they're still winning performances, they want to try something different. They've tried their training, the physical training, and it's not helping. So they'll work on, you know, the mental game. Maybe this is an athlete who wants to go professional and knows they need that mental advantage to get there. So again, at this end of the continuum, it's to help athletes go from being good to becoming great at what they're doing. And so with athletes here, what we do is, one, we help them mentally prepare for competition. Think about all the hours and time you spend on physical preparation. And I'm sure for many athletes, the mental prep is very limited. And so we help athletes mentally prepare in addition to their physical preparation. We help athletes develop what's called a growth mindset. So helping them redefine what success means, helping them grow from adversity rather than adversity being a setback for them. We teach athletes techniques and skills to help enhance their focus and limit their distraction during competition. We also help athletes enhance their own motivation, confidence. We teach a skill called imagery, which essentially is recreating in your mind an event or an experience. And there's many benefits to imagery. And then lastly, we really help with consistency. A lot of times athletes come in because they want to be more consistent. Maybe they're performing really well in practice, but for some reason that's not translating to competition, or maybe, you know, some competitions are doing great and others not so much. So we help them become more consistent by working on a more consistent mental game. The physical performance will follow. So we want to do a little activity with you, and we know we can't hear you or see you right now, but what want you to do is I want you to think about your best performance. Bring that to mind if you can. Consider what year you were in, what team you're on, who you're competing against. And once you bring that to mind, I want you to think about what were some of the factors that contributed to that success that day, to that being your best performance. And if you can, what was the number one contributing factor? And in the chat section, share with us whether that contributing factor was mental, physical, and if you're really having a hard time distinguishing between the two and it feels like it's in that middle ground, you know, put both. Share that with us.
Marisa, can I share a story from me just as people start putting things in the chat?
Yeah, please.
So you kind of a best moment. So for the when I was playing in Madrid for the King's Cup or the Copa del Rey, and the championship game was probably, you know, if I look back, probably the best game I've ever played. And I think I was 8 for 8 from the field. I didn't have a turnover and all that sort of stuff like that. And when I started working with a sports psychologist a year after this moment. And for me, they started with this same question. And I joked that, like, well, the first shot went in, so the basket looked a lot wider, you know, and they kind of laughed and they were like, well, so is that physical or mental? And I was like, well, that's mental. You know, so I think just to kind of give people time to throw some questions in the chat. And we won the game, by the way, so that always helps.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and as you're putting in those responses, I also want you to bring to mind your worst performance. That performance you might be embarrassed to share and you definitely don't want to repeat again. Think about what team you're on, what year you're competing, who you're competing against. Thinking about what contributed to that being the worst performance, and what was the number one contributing factor. And again, in the chat section, share with us whether that was mental, physical, or maybe a combination of the both.
So we've got some for their best performance. One person said, I think the number one factor was confidence and trust in the preparation. It was mental, definitely. And then Kim said, for me, it was mental. I was focused and didn't let any pain from injuries affect my play. So that was a best performance one too.
Mm.
Great. Yeah, and what we know, when I ask this question maybe towards more high school age athletes, it may be more physical because they're still developing their skill set. But at this level and beyond, what we're finding is that the response tends to be more mental. But the problem is people aren't spending time working on their mental game. If the number one contributing factor is mental to both your best and worst performance, then wow, how important would it be to work on the psychological elements of the game? And so today we're going to talk a little bit about more strategies we use with athletes, but specific skills that you can start to implement now, whether you're competing or practicing or not, to start to work on your mental game, because we know it's extremely important. So moving towards this middle ground of the continuum, here athletes are facing life stressors, adversity, as we all do. So this could be relationship issues, challenges in our romantic relationships, issues balancing academics and athletics. Maybe we've been just really feeling down. Maybe COVID is just feeling so overwhelming, and the unknowns with, athletics is just overwhelming for us. So many athletes come in at this end of the continuum. And again, our goal is to move them across this continuum. So with these specific athletes, some of the things that we focus on is, one, confidence. Injury recovery is a huge one. If you're an athlete at this point, you probably have had an injury to some extent. And many athletes really struggle with coming back to sport. Am I going to be prepared? Am I going to perform just as well? Am I going to injure myself again? And so we help prepare them for that return to sport. Perfectionism is huge, especially with the athletic population. So, to some extent, perfectionism has helped you get to this point, but can prohibit you from becoming and going to the places you could be. So we help with that. Navigating relationships, navigating and working through performance anxiety, mental blocks. This is pretty common for our divers. High jumpers, we see this often when they're kind of running up to the pole and they don't jump and they go again. We see this very often with gymnasts as well and other sports. And so helping athletes overcome mental blocks. Fear of failure is, I think, an experience all athletes can relate to. We help athletes work through that. And then lastly, we help athletes just develop a toolbox of coping skills, because our goal is that you won't need us forever and that you're going to be able to work through this on your own at some point. So we help give you specific strategies that you can utilize within sport, but also outside of sport.
And now shifting to the other side of the continuum. Now we work with athletes who deal with clinical and mental health issues. So when maybe you're experiencing a mental health problem that's affecting various areas of your life, right? Not just your performance in your sport, but maybe your academics, your relationship, your hygiene, your friendships. And we give you the tools to really try to overcome this, meet you where you're at. And the truth is, we all experience mental health differently. And so these characteristics are going to be individual to you, but we will help you move along the continuum to thriving and resilience. And now these are some athletes that will normalize mental health issues. Michael Phelps has dealt with depression and anxiety. He recently came out with a documentary called The Weight of Gold, and I recommend you guys all listen to it. It has a bunch of Olympic athletes on there who discuss what it feels like to have a mental health issue while also being a high performer. And I went through some research on Michael Phelps, and I read a tweet he wrote recently. He said, "I struggled with anxiety and depression and questioned whether or not I wanted to be alive anymore. It was when I hit this low that I decided to reach out and ask for help of a licensed professional." And I think that just reiterates that if you are struggling, you don't have to do it alone. Lean on your supports, lean on your counselors, your coaches. You're not alone in it. Ricky Williams, football player, he dealt with substance abuse issues. He also had social anxiety. He has come out recently and had a lot of talks on just how to handle social anxiety, how to handle it when people put expectations on you as a performer, and the anxiety related to that, and maybe not meeting those expectations all the time. Serena Williams, I hope we all know, she is a crazy good athlete, highly talented physically, and her mental game is incredible too. And she dealt with postpartum depression after having a baby, and she's talked openly about that as well. And then Keith O'Neill, he was a linebacker for the Colts, played football. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And for a long time, he didn't know what was going on. You know, his mindset just felt like he couldn't function and be the best version of himself. And it wasn't until he asked for help that he really improved and started to get better. So these are different services that we offer within Inspire Wellness. Individual sports psychology sessions. And as we said, there doesn't have to be a severe mental health problem for you to come in, right? You could be feeling good now, and we just want to enhance your skills. We also offer team building. So we provide different team building strategies to help build the cohesion between teammates. We offer athlete leadership and development. We provide education for parents and coaches. If there's one thing I've learned throughout my career as an athlete, right? Sometimes coaches need to learn how to put themselves in your shoes as athletes too. And so we can develop a better communication between you and your coach just to help them understand you better as well. We provide workshops and presentations, enhancing your skill set through athlete psychology and peak performance. We provide assessments. That's something we're doing right now with the Brooklyn Nets as they're starting their draft process. We offer different personality assessments and different assessments just to see how they'll fit in, and also just help them understand themselves better in order to perform their best. And then, as I said before, we consult with coaches and staff. So mental health during COVID, I'd like you guys to use the chat here and get involved. When you think of mental health, what comes to mind? And you can be right, wrong, just throw anything out there. We can start to discuss it. We have one person who says stress. Okay. Mindfulness. How one feels mentally and emotionally. Anxiety. Depression. Self-talk. Yeah, that's something we work on a lot with athletes. Right? And self-talk can be positive or negative, two sides of the spectrum. So we all have mental health, and I said it before, but we all experience it differently. And just based on our culture and society, we emphasize physical health more than mental, typically, right? We get an annual checkup visit every year with our doctor, but who's really there to check on how we're doing mentally? And I think COVID has really forced a lot of athletes to sit with the uncomfortable feelings, to sit with the discomfort because of the uncertainty. And we're going to give you some tools and strategies today to deal with that. Before we get into that, these are just some statistics that were reported by the NCAA on how college athletes are coping with COVID. And so the majority of student athletes reported high rates of mental distress since the pandemic started. Over a third reported experiencing sleep difficulties. More than a quarter reported feeling sadness and a sense of loss. 1 in 12 reported feeling so depressed it has been difficult to function. constantly or almost every day. And I think this is to normalize it, but also just to show some self-compassion for yourself right now, because this is a unique time in your life. It's a unique time as an athlete. And in addition to that, I think as professionals in the field, we're noticing that it's very hard to stay motivated. And as an athlete, that's key to performing, is being motivated. But it's hard sometimes when you don't know what's to come. So we've got 4 different strategies here. And just to apply during this time in COVID, I know a lot of you aren't playing your sport right now and you're doing Zoom meetings. So goal setting is something that's really great just to help you feel accomplished, to move towards something, to keep you motivated. And what strategy we like to use, it's called SMART goal setting. So SMART stands for setting specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goals. And I'll give you an example of that. If a goal of mine personally is to be more mindful, I would set a goal of maybe meditating, for 3 minutes every day for a week, and then reassess how I feel after that week. So I'm setting a time limit on it for 3 minutes a day for a week long, and I'm making sure that I'm moving towards my goal of becoming more mindful. I think during this time too, it's okay to keep goals very simple, right? So even setting 3 specific goals for yourself each day can have a big impact right now. So write them down, check them off, and your brain will feel like you're accomplishing something and working towards something.
So another strategy, mental imagery. And mental imagery is a great strategy, especially when you can't be on the field, you can't be on the court, you can't be in sport. So, I mean, this applies to COVID, but this also applies to times where there's an injury, or let's say you have a bad day in practice and you really want to continue working.
Oh no.
Can be used in all of those circumstances. Most people think about the visualization aspect of it, right? Closing your eyes and like visualizing yourself within the game or within the moment that is as the most uncomfortable. And that's what I actually have athletes really think about, like the times where they feel pressure is too high and they need to work on it. But the other part of mental imagery is adding the kinesthetic imagery aspect to it. And that's really getting all of your senses involved, right? And so that's oversimplifying, but there's really trying to make it as accurate as possible. So maybe an example would be you're at home, you can't practice that day, but you put on your practice gear anyway. And you stand up in your living room and you kind of jog yourself through. If you're a runner, you're running your course, right? And you're just picturing the course, you're picturing the part of the course that's the most uncomfortable for you, thinking about the time of the meet that you're at, the discomfort you're feeling in your muscles, the self-doubt that begins to bubble. And so by visualizing it, but then adding all of that discomfort, it makes it more real. It gets the brain really involved. And in fact, we have what we call mirror neurons. And the brain is actually firing the same way when we're doing a great job of creating a good mental imagery practice, right? So your brain, while shooting a basket or running a course, if you're recreating it for yourself and you're increasing the accuracy of that mental imagery, your brain is firing in the same way as if you're going through that event or through that motor process. And so by creating it, I want you to create it, and then I want you to be successful. So on the course, as you're running the course, that self-doubt comes up, but then you might picture yourself or visualize yourself using a self-talk tool and saying, keep moving. And you picture yourself keep moving. You go through the motions and you just push through that discomfort, that self-doubt, that discomfort in the muscles you feel, right? And so this can apply to the basketball court. This can apply to the track to the course. It could also apply in school where, like thinking about a time where you're feeling extra pressure during a test and you're not thinking well anymore. So using mental imagery to bring yourself back to that moment and really sitting in it and still pushing through and being successful. So it's a great tool that has many uses, and hopefully that gets you guys thinking about at least a start to thinking about that tool in ways it might be useful to you.
So mindfulness is another strategy that you can utilize right now. If we think about the anxiety we're feeling from COVID, probably because we're thinking very future oriented, right? Like, what if we don't get our season? What's going to happen? The things that we can't predict. And we see this happen in sport as well. Athletes that are feeling anxious in performance are jumping to the end of the game, the score at the end of the game, when they gotta get to that point. And so staying present is really important to decrease anxiety, but also to perform optimally. So some really easy, simple strategies you can start to practice to enhance your mindfulness, your ability to be present, are one, just utilizing some of the amazing apps that are already out there. So one app that I recommend often is Headspace, and another app is called Calm. And they have some free features on there, so you don't have to spend the money for those apps. Another thing you might think about doing is spending 2 minutes a day being with your breath. What I mean by that is just closing your eyes and fully experience breathing, not slowing down your breath per se, but just being with your breath, noticing what it feels like in your lungs and throughout your body, every inhale and exhale. And anytime you're finding your mind slip away, acknowledging that and bringing your attention right back to your breath. And one last simple strategy that you can utilize to enhance your ability to be mindful is pick an object every single day. So today, let's say I grab my pen, and be with your pen for 2 minutes. So when I say be with your pen, notice what it feels like in your hands. Notice what it looks like, the different colors. Just really taking a time to fully observe what this is. And again, naturally, because it's just a pen, not super exciting to look at, your mind is going to shift attention, probably to the future or questioning why you're doing this exercise. Now acknowledge that and bring your attention back. So what we're doing is we're starting to work on having more control over our focus, where our attention is, and also we're grounding ourselves in the present moment, the moment where we feel most in control and most at ease.
The last area we wanted to touch on is team cohesion, right? And that's the connection within the team. And you are likely part of multiple teams, part of the sports team, but you also likely have a team in life. And so we thought we'd be remiss not to point out the importance of staying connected. There's part of me that wished instead of calling it social distancing, we called it physical distancing, because despite the fact that we need to have separation, keep ourselves safe, make good decisions related to going into social environments, like we need to find ways to stay connected. And so whether that means for you the focus on staying connected with your team outside of sport and making sure there's ways that you continue to engage your family, your friends, and get that sense of community really kind of bubbling within you, or we're talking about improving your team cohesion within sport and the need to do extra in terms of enjoying one another's presence, finding fun things to do together and having to be creative with that for now. Making sure that despite the fact that there might be some of you having to practice and then go, looking for small windows and small ways to stay connected with your teammates, whether it's more virtual now, or it's through a text chain, or through other means of just finding ways to replace that sense of connection, because there's things we're missing out on that we don't even realize we're missing out on. So putting some extra effort in team cohesion is really important right now. And what we all know is if team cohesion, if connection is high, performance improves. So as a team, that's a great way to continue to work on performance enhancement. So thank you everyone for your time today. right now, shifting in, I'll turn over to Ryan. I think we're going to shift into some questions.
Yeah, that was great. Sorry, I had 2 pages of notes going, and so I wanted to flip back to my initial questions. So first of all, thank you very much. I thought that was kind of a very comprehensive and broad overview of the field, and then also its application and who it really impacts. At this time, I want to invite some people to put some more questions in the chat, but I have a few to kind of get us started with, and you kind of touched upon this, Paul, Marissa, and Kate, but how many times when working with an athlete do you find their block or their hurdle has nothing to do with sports itself? And take your pick on who would like to fire first on that one.
So, I mean, my initial thought is because of the overlap between sport and life. I think one answer to that is there's always implication outside of sport. And so likely what they're experiencing within sport, we can kind of tie that to life and their tendencies within that. I'd say within the work that I'm currently doing, maybe if I had to put a percentage on it, maybe 20 to 30% of the time, where it's their own self-doubt created in other areas of life that's bringing distraction and maladaptive tendencies to sport.
Okay. Marissa, I think this was a part of the conversation that you led here. And you guys all talked about the 4 different, the different types of athletes, somebody who's thriving, somebody who, getting by, somebody who's really struggling. And then the other side, when should an athlete start considering working with a sports psychologist or really trying to hone that mental piece?
Yesterday. So I would say absolutely we want to start sports psychology immediately because it is so important to performance. As Kate mentioned, like Michael Phelps had a quote about it wasn't until he was like severely struggling till he reached out. And my reaction is, wow, how differently his experience may have been in the Olympics if he reached out early, because a lot of the work we do is preventative in many ways. And so not only are we helping you get better, right? We would never say, when do I start physically practicing for my competition? Like absolutely now, right? We need to start now. And for our mental health and our overall well-being, I think it's important for us to be proactive in that work as well. Kate or Paul, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree. I think our hope is that you haven't hit rock bottom just to come and see us, right? And a lot of times that's what happens in the therapy world, but work on it now. Every day is an opportunity to grow and get better as an athlete, as a person. And that's what we're here to help.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can add is a metaphor I often use is work on the roof when the sun is shining. And it's certainly not my own, but the idea of like, now is a great time, right? If you think you have it all together, how do you continue to push yourself? And if there's things that you feel like there's holes in the roof, all right, let's work on that. Wherever you're at, there can be a benefit to working on the mental side of the game.
Okay. Kate, let me throw this question at you. What kind of results can an athlete expect from working on the mental training focus? I think it's you kind of discussed it underlyingly throughout the content, but what are some of the areas that you can judge how this would be impacting an athlete?
I think a key one for an athlete, and even growing up as an athlete myself, there's a stigma around mental health and asking for help. And part of working with a sports psychologist and the value of it is leaning on someone through the difficulties, the lows and the highs, right? And so we provide that safe place for them to feel connected, supported, to help them through the process. But as for results, right, you get it, whatever you put into it, you'll get out of it, right? And a lot of it relies on the athlete, the work they put in. We're there to give you the tools. I see a lot of athletes who increase their confidence, who then get on the field and, start to develop that self-belief just simply by doing this stuff that we're teaching them. And I think that's a key one to performance. There's so many others. I can't just pick one, but
okay. Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to kind of shift a little bit here. And obviously you guys probably get this a lot, but some of the questions in the chat deal with like how to get involved in this as a career or an internship. So from Avi, I've been looking for a sports psychology internship as I want to become one someday. Do you know how I can get in contact with someone to find one? Paul, we'll just go around the horn. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, in terms of finding experience, I mean, I would start in the area in which you live, right? Looking into the opportunities that are out there, reaching out to other sports psychologists, getting a sense of who has positions opening or opportunities. I mean, we receive messages, maybe 5 a week of people interested, and we try to, either point them in the right direction or get a sense of, where we're at and whether we're able to take more on. So I would say, within your network, start there, but then don't be afraid to kind of expand that search, reaching out to others who within the field. LinkedIn, social media. I know through our Inspire Wellness Instagram page, we get a lot of DMs there in terms of the experiences we might be able to offer. So those are great ways to kind of reach out that allow us some time to figure out what our needs are and whether we can help, as well as if we have other colleagues looking for people.
Got you. So with kind of that for students who are maybe in the undergrad phase of things and are looking for, a master's program that kind of caters to this, any specific programs to look at or explore for a student who's interested in that type of thing?
I would say the first thing you want to do when you're thinking about masters is definitely connecting with a sports psychologist or a mental coach, because they're very two different experiences. So do you want to work specifically on performance enhancement? Are you wanting to run the full gamut of mental health and in sport performance? And how much time do you want to spend in school? Right? And how much the financial thing we want to consider as well. So all of those factors we want to consider before even discussing which school to go to, because we want to make sure if we're investing in that education that we're making sure we go to a program that meets our needs and our goal set. So I definitely say that. And for me personally, with the master's programs that I looked at, I was really intentional about finding programs where I could start the work and that I'd get supervision and I'd get that one-on-one experience. Some programs provide that and others kind of leave it on you to go find that. So that was one thing that I considered in that process.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. And maybe just to add highlight to it by repeating it, it's that question of what do you want to do with the degree? Because there is, depending on the level of education, how much time you spend on it, can be limiting in your assessment experience. Or, certain organizations, sport organizations are looking for PhDs, PsyDs, other baseball being one of them that's really open to and looking for master's level people. So it really depends on what you hope to do with it. And Marisa already mentioned too, but just to be somewhat repetitive, the question of whether you want to do the clinical work and the sport work like the three of us do. Do you want that matchup or do you want to just do sport? And so that could shift what degree and what school you look into.
Great, thank you. So this question is for Dr. Norman. You had the opportunity to work with various colleges at different divisions based on your expertise, as well as an understanding that not all colleges have the resources to hire a sports psychologist. In what ways do you think Division III colleges can offer its student athletes the psychological support they need to perform at a high level?
Yeah, I think one thing that maybe a lot of people don't know is we work with insurance. So the program, a D3 program in itself, might not be able to afford services. but that insurance might cover the work that you're doing with a sports psychologist. The other thing is, at the end of the day, we love what we do and we're willing to work with programs. So even just reaching out and picking the brains of like, how much would this cost? There's so many variations in the work we do. Maybe it's a one-off presentation. Maybe it is one-on-one. Maybe it's just consulting with, right now with one of a university, I'm just working with captains, and it's up to them to kind of provide the information they learn in their work with me to their team. So there's definitely ways we can be flexible so that it's more affordable for D3 programs. But I think for Division III, there's so many unique experiences for those athletes, especially with resources, that it's even more important in some ways to have that support from a sports psychologist.
That makes sense. So I know that like we've had a couple of different conversations throughout like preparation for this. And I know you guys have worked with athletes in the bubbles and, whether it's the bubble for the WNBA or the NBA bubble in different things, which is kind of a unique experience. So obviously with, protecting the individual athlete that you worked with, what's one story that really kind of resonates with you in your career of an athlete, and maybe it was a tool that you helped them utilize, maybe it was a set of circumstances that they were dealing with that you found really interesting. Kate, let's start with you, and hopefully I'm not throwing you on the spot because you look like you're thinking here.
I'm thinking through it.
Thinking's good. Thinking's good.
This was more of a high school athlete, and he was a baseball player, and he really just struggling at the plate, having sort of a mental block at the plate. He was a pitcher too, felt confident on the mound, but when it came to being at the plate, it was a rush of negative thinking. And so he was constantly thinking, what if I strike out? What is the coach going to think? And I think one negative thought just kind of led to another. And a tool we worked on that actually helped him in the moment was finding a focal point. So in baseball, you really try, it's a very slow game. So you try to slow them down to really focus on one thing that will help them reset, refocus, and focus on that instead of the negative thinking patterns. So for him, he would look at his bat and there was an M label on the bat. And so after each pitch, he would, look at the bat, take a deep breath, look at the M, refocus, and enter the batter's box. Mm-hmm. And so for him, that was like, okay, flush out the negative thinking, reset, next pitch. And it geared him into focusing on the next play instead of anything in the past.
Great.
That's my example.
It's gonna be a tough one to follow. Kate, you set the bar really high, even though we threw you on the spot. So Marisa or Paul, who wants to fire next on that one?
I'm happy to go. I mean, I'll take it a slightly different angle. One of the things that I was surprised about when I started in this realm is athletes not always accurate in their assessment and their assessment of themselves and their assessment of play. And at every level, finding people who benefited from a process to better evaluate past performances and let them go. And so I can think of a number of athletes that I worked with that part of the process was to look at past performances, and whether it's talking about it or it's watching video or writing it down and working it through. By looking at past performances, and like what I found with a number of athletes is the tendency to I don't want to look at it. It was so bad. But then once we look at all of their thinking related to their performances, better understanding, moving towards more of a neutral thinking. Let's look at it. Let's understand it for what it was, knowing that it's over. It's all data now, but we tie so much emotion to past performances. So creating a system where we would look at that performance, talk about it, understand it for what it was, and then, okay, what can we take from it and move forward? And once it was reducing some of that and exposing them to past performances and giving them some tools to work through that, they were able to take that into the now and and in future performances in a way that allowed them to be kinder to themselves within the moment and after games. Because part of it, right, as soon as the game ends, it's about the next game. Now it's recovery between now and the next performance. So let's do that well too.
Yeah, for me, I think at least the collegiate level, one that seems fairly common is losing that desire, not having fun anymore when playing, and feeling like sport became a job rather than something we look forward to and playing. And a huge part of that was losing sight of their why, but also losing a sense of themselves and that identity, that athletic identity had, you know, they've been so absorbed in that identity that not knowing who they are outside of sport. And that's extremely scary, especially for our senior athletes. So that what that work kind of looked like was, one, why did you even start sport in the first place? Like, think of last time you had fun, like what contributed to that fun? Were you goofing around with your teammates? Were you just really challenging yourself? Did you have a strong relationship with coach? And then start to peel the layers of some identities, like who else are you? You know, sport is something you do. It's not who you are. And so who is that person, you know, underneath that uniform, and starting to explore that. And that's a conversation that, you know, many athletes aren't used to. People aren't asking that question, because when we talk about our student athletes, right, student athletes are student athletes, you know, and so even how we label them, sometimes I think their identity gets lost. So that's a lot of the work, is just discovering who they are as individuals. Great,
thank you. So I've got one quick final question, and we'll make it quick. And I want to thank you guys once again. I know we're a little bit over time here, but I think this is just such a great informative start in giving some tools to our student athletes. So thank you very much. Final thoughts. So we're all kind of like hovering around this mental health piece, right? And you guys all as mental health professionals, what do you guys do for yourself? As far as how have you managed the fact that, because every day you're expected to, for lack of better terminology, fill the buckets of the people you work with, right? Make them feel better, help them find those tools. So what are you guys doing in this unique time and space, as all three of you guys are working from home, it looks like, in regards to just making sure you guys are ready to do what you need to do?
Great question. And happy to kick it off. So for me, I'm finding probably three things. Definitely working on my goal setting, as Kate talked about, right? Really trying to be, I feel like my goals were a long list of goals. And so I've really tried to highlight like the top three and really allow myself to focus on those three before moving on to the next. I think I added more meditation. So trying to really be consistent, at least 3 to 10 minutes of meditation each day. And then the third is I'll combine family time and being outside, right? Initially noticed that I was working inside. I mean, there were days where it's going by that I wasn't getting outside. I wasn't, seeing the trees. I wasn't walking and actually seeing the sky. So making being intentional about getting outside, whether it's by myself or with my kids. And just, even if that's just walking around the block, at least I got to smell the fresh air, see the sky, and kind of ground myself that way.
Thank you, Paul.
I'll go next. I've gotten really good at setting a morning routine. I think when COVID started, I was very thrown off. I'm very structured, like my routine, and it forced me to really develop my own, handle the adversity a little bit. So in the mornings, I make sure I wake up. I do some sort of exercise every morning. I actually put a boxing bag in my garage if I'm feeling like doing boxing. And then I meditate and then start the day and try to shift gears into work mode. And then for downtime, I have a black lab, love spending time with my dog. Same with Paul. I try to get outside and exercise and just move and spend time with family.
For me, humor is my medicine. So I just love laughing with people, watching comedy, things of that nature. That's huge for me. I think I have to be really intentional about identifying like small successes in the day. Naturally, like right after this presentation, I'll mentally make note, oh, that could have been better, that could have been better, that could have been better, right? That's just my tendency. And so I'm going to have to force myself to say, well, what am I proud of? Right. And having that with myself every single day. And then the next thing is just being realistic with myself. At the beginning of COVID, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to speak all these different languages and I'm going to like have these hobbies and I'm going to like learn how to sew and all of these things. And that just was not realistic. And I was actually putting more pressure on myself to become this Renaissance woman by the end of COVID. So just like small wins, just like small things I can be proud of every day. I think that's been my self-care.
Okay, great. Some great advice from people who know the importance of it, right? So once again, thank you very much on behalf of the CUNY Athletic Conference and all of our student athletes for this. I think this was a great opportunity for them, and yeah, we look forward to working with Inspire Wellness down the road to provide further support for our student athletes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Yeah. So that concludes our time today on Talk About It Tuesday with the CUNY Athletic Conference. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Hospital for Special Surgery, and today's guests, Inspire Wellness. Kim and Matt, thank you for all the work from behind the scenes here. And as well, if you want to get in touch with Inspire Wellness, all of their information is in the chat. And feel free to follow them on social media. It's a great social media follow for just a little bit of daily motivation. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.